Okay, I'm David Solomanoff, the president of the New York chapter of the Internet Society. We're here today as the remote hub for the Internet Governance Forum USA being held in Washington, D.C., organized in great part by our friends at the D.C. chapter of the Internet Society. And we have a few of our active members here to give us their opinions on the pressing issues that have to do with Internet governance. As the role of the U.S. Department of Commerce changes and the ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, changes there, shifts in terms of the role that they take with Internet governance. And of course, there's a lot of concern about the continuing or expanding the multi-stakeholder model of Internet governance. The biggest issue, I think, here is that now that most people who use the Internet and rely on it have very little understanding that there is any type of governance of the Internet, and as a consequence are vulnerable to any kind of change that might be made in that model because they simply don't know that there is such a thing. I'm going to go to one of our members here, Michael Lewis, and ask you what your opinion is.
No, I think, thanks, David. And I think you touched on a couple of good points. And one thing that I wanted to that I was thinking about on the way here is the fact that there seems to be a need for an update of telecommunications policy in the U.S. in general. Since the Telecom Act of '96, there really hasn't been any sort of focus on a broad policy. There have been bits and pieces, of course, but it seems to me that there could be this could be a good time for that. Of course, the Telecom Act of '96 basically decentralized the local phone monopolies and also opened up cable, long distance, but and at this point, having the spread of mobile technology, mobile wireless connectivity, and also open information, the expansion of open information, open ideas, and new large global players such as Google and others since that time. It seems that an update, a broad national update, is necessary in the U.S. and I'm wanting to get your opinion on that.
Sure. Okay, well, I was going to pick that up in another way. Many people feel that there is inadequate competition for internet, in terms of internet service providers in most areas, and that is a good part of the problem in terms of some of the things like net neutrality and remaining underserved areas in terms of high-speed internet service and that type of thing.
Sure.
What would you, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, and this dates back to Telecom Act when there were more providers at that time, and I think the purpose and the goal of the Telecom Act was to create more competition, and instead we have fewer players. So I think, but I think part of the issue is the rise of mobile connectivity, which I don't think was factored or really thought of at that time. And there's a new monopoly, I would say, around access to mobile connectivity, and I think that is part of where the issue lies. What do you think about that?
I would agree that that's certainly an issue too.
Yeah.
And of course, the current providers, the large ones, the Verizon, Comcast, are primarily interested in getting the maximum revenue from existing investments rather than expanding to areas where the cost per customer is much higher.
Right.
At the same time, it isn't an open playing field for new service providers to get involved to the degree that they could. To Jeremy.
Okay.
Can I just so you can say Dave Burstein, is ready to Skype in. So I told him, in about sort of half an hour.
That works totally.
And
Okay.
so I bring my camera. Do you want to get over there and sit on that chair?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right there. I'm Jeremy Pesner. Some of you watching this in DC may remember me. I was there for quite a while, but I've recently returned to the city. This city.
The city.
Yeah.
City, okay.
Yeah, the city. As far as I'm concerned, there's only one the city. Now, those of you who maybe know, I actually went to school for these issues, so I was able to study them in depth, and I wrote my master's thesis on the history of internet policy and development. The idea being, if we're going to understand the issues of today and tomorrow, we first have to have a very solid understanding of the issues of yesterday. If we don't really understand exactly where we came from, we won't understand the context that all of these issues were raised in and have been raised in and will continue to need to be raised in. Because the more I've learned about what's gone on in the past, the more I see history repeating. And we'll need to understand exactly what has gone on with these issues in order to have any chance of breaking the cycle. And this isn't just true for you and me and others of us already in the internet governance sphere. This is actually a good way to bring in people who have not yet been introduced to the internet governance world, and that's actually something that a few of us here have been working on a lot lately. I'm actually going to be presenting this at a hacker conference 2 days from now, so you can consider this a kind of warm-up or draft presentation. I didn't even get to finish all my slides, but I can talk through the rest. But for now, I will go through what we've got here. Internet governance by its history, and maybe what we can do next. So, the internet started its life in the mind of someone called J.C.R. Licklider. He envisioned what he called an intergalactic network, the network of these standalone giant server machines together so that they could all suddenly communicate. This sounds obvious in hindsight, but think about what computers were back then. They were these giant room-sized, processing machines where you had to insert punch cards and get data back from. Why on earth would these things need to be networked? They were just these giant behemoths that were input-output the value of networking together was not nearly so clear back then. It'd be like trying to network calculators, I guess. So while he had the idea, Robert Taylor, his successor as the head of ARPA, is the Information Processing Technology Office, IPTO, was able to actually get this off the ground. And one of the very first sites where we had a node in this ARPANET was at UCLA. Run by Professor Leonard Kleinrock, who had been developing the packet switching technique that we still use, the foundation of which is still used in internet net connections today. And he had some grad students, which should be very familiar names to you all, Vince Cerf, Steve Crocker, and John Postel. And 3 of them were key members of what became known as the Network Working Group. These were people who were meeting just kind of on their own, on the side, trying to discuss new rules and ideas and potential, structures for this emerging network. If that sounds familiar, it really should. Because what you are talking about here is the history of the Internet Society. They even established the request for comments protocol on the ARPANET development. They always assumed that ARPA was going to come in and say, nope, we've got the plan now. But as they went on, they realized that there was no plan. The Network Working Group became the de facto management organization for this network, simply just because these 3 stepped up and decided that that's what they were going to do. So, how did this network work? Well, key to it is that anyone on the network could participate. Obviously, you needed to have because these people were scattered all throughout the country, they needed to use the network to communicate. So obviously, if you weren't on the ARPANET, it was hard for you to participate in the group in any meaningful fashion. But the good news is that as more sites got online, this group became more and more expansive. One early member talks about how the fact that there was no air of exclusion. Really, it was an idea that anybody could join in and start doing what they wanted to do, as long as they, didn't violate the communal spirit of what was going on there. And these people were able to work together to invent some of the core technologies of what we use today, like, for example, email. It was really put together by Ray Tomlinson, who combined the files transfer protocol, already invented by that point, with his own custom messaging system to send across different timeshare machines. And all of a sudden they realized, oh wait, we have a way to conveniently send and track messages. So the email protocol was developed through that. Now, in around the early mid-1970s, the transmission control protocol and internet protocol made the scene. What was going on was that while the ARPANET was the first packet switching network, it was by no means stayed the only one. There were a whole bunch of different networks that started to proliferate, including the KNet and the NSFNet and the Aloha Net. Well, NSFNet was a little later. But the point is, by the time TCP/IP was made the scene, there was a number of different networks that were all using their own different protocols and ways of connecting. So TCP/IP was the idea of an internetworking standard. It could be the protocol to internetwork the networks. And because it only charged itself with sending data, it didn't have to worry about what the machines actually did with it. The protocols that actually controlled how the data was managed, used, and sent and received were still on the ends of the machines. And this ended up being codified in what we know as the end-to-end principle, something still very important in internet governance today. Now, as TCP/IP became more popular within the network working group, and packet switch networking as a whole became a very hot technology, other standards suddenly started to develop. We had most notably, we had the X25 standard and the Open Systems Interconnection Standard, or OSI standard. Now, X25 was put forward by the telecom companies. In other words, this was a standard that would have given them a lot of control and power over what kind of traffic was being sent across the network. OSI was actually more of a model that was meant to ensure interoperability, but it was put together by an international standards organization, a very political body with a lot of red tape and things that you might expect from something like that. Now, TCP/IP, by contrast, was being spearheaded by the network working group. They were adding to it. They were to grow this thing. And Vince Cerf's assessment of OSI was that versus TCP/IP was that the robustness of TCP/IP was that it was created in this sort of laboratory setting provided by the network working group, whereas OSI was very theoretical and mostly model-based and, again, developed very bureaucratically. And yeah, yes. So TCP/IP ended up carrying the day because it was open source. Anyone could implement it with no backlash, and it started to get very popular on the Unix operating systems. And when Sun was developed in the late 80s, early 90s, they were able to install ships TCP/IP on all of their machines, which really propelled the technology onto almost every standalone computer in use. And that really helped to sort of make it carry the day by default versus the other two standards, because it was just out there. It was really just easy for everyone to have, and it really just sort of carried the day by default. So now we have network privatization. Because we had all these different networks, it was kind of really a patchwork system at this point. And it was usable, but really barely so. And again, it was really just something that had been cobbled together over time. TCP/IP helped to connect them, but it was all just translating to this, translating to that, many more steps than were ultimately necessary. It was also still mostly the province of researchers and computer geeks, not really mainstream yet. Many people did not yet have a personal computer in their home. So the use of the internet for them was not very clear. But the World Wide Web started to come around. And all of a sudden, that started to make things a lot more accessible to people. All of a sudden, you had pictures, you had text, you had the ability to use email at the consumer level. All of a sudden, this seemed like a very accessible gateway to this rapidly emerging internetwork. And so, as the Clinton administration came into power, they saw that privatization was seen. They saw privatization as the means to get the internet into the hands of more people. Many of these networks were established by universities or governments, and they couldn't keep. They weren't in the. They weren't in the business of providing internet to consumers, and they certainly couldn't keep up with demand. So they saw privatization by telecom. And now we have the National Information Infrastructure. This is the name technically coined by Robert Kahn, one half of the TCP/IP duo, that was referring to suddenly this emerging and widening world of internet and computer technology that was accessible to the average consumer. They really had some high hopes for what the NII was, and they explained that this was really something that was going to benefit everybody. It will forever change the way that people live, work, and interact with each other. Therefore, technology was championed as a huge component of the Gore vice presidency in particular. He'd already had a very strong track record of working on technology issues during his years in the House and the Senate. So being elevated to the rank of vice president really gave him the opportunity to pursue this whole hog. And as such, he had the U.S. Department of Commerce set up this Information Infrastructure Task Force to really start immediately through the policy issues that these emerging technology was going to bring. What I found really interesting about this was how forward-thinking the government was on this particular issue. Even before everyone had computers, had the internet, was posting lots of content, people were thinking, how is this going to work? What do we need to be aware of? How exactly can we ensure that everyone's needs and voices are met and acknowledged? And so then we get to the question of exactly who was on those committees. Now, they established different committees for different issues, including intellectual property, online privacy, and the use of government information. Those were mostly staffed by internal government staffers in different areas of the Department of Commerce. Those committees had different outputs. There were differing levels of influence. So the Committee on Privacy published a report with big blue guidelines for privacy, advising companies that make use of consumers' personal information to make sure that they were aware, that consumers were aware of how that information was being used, and other sorts of privacy guidelines of that nature. By contrast, the report on intellectual property was very specific. They said, we can interpret law, should either add to the IP law to account for this, or interpret the existing IP law in such a way that we can really work in favor of copyright holders. So that was really, those committees had differing levels of output. But then we have the question of who was involved from outside. That were not already within government's walls. And most in particular, they had what was called the National Information Infrastructure Advisory Council, and that included a number of key stakeholders from media companies, from technology companies, education, library information, even primary education in the kindergarten, second grade. So they had a whole lot of different people in one room. Published advisory reports with broad guidelines on all of these issues. They really sort of talked about how people could become aware, things that people wouldn't really find particularly controversial. It really represented the base level of agreement that everyone could come to. Because as you might expect with such a wide variety of stakeholders, everyone was going to have different opinions, perspectives, and needs, and it could be hard to come to, really like solid consensus on this is what we should do on this issue, and this is what we should do on that issue. But they all agreed that ideas that Now, in terms, even from outside of that, there was some public outrage that was sparked by a couple of key initiatives in this space. One of them was the IP Committee's recommendations on intellectual property, as I mentioned before. Many libraries and academic institutions and others that had more of a sharing view of information were not really feeling so great about the IP Committee's recommendations, and they set up a series of protests and sent a series of letters explaining promoting their dissatisfaction. And it turned out that there was a big battle between all of the organizations for years. But then there was some involvement with with an international copyright agreement between the U.S. and other states. But what ended up happening eventually was that a lot of the initial suggestions by the IP Committee were translated into the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998. So that was where the IP Committee's recommendations went to. Senator James Exxon's Communications Decency Act was talking about censoring the pornographic information on the internet, and this got this got a lot of outrage as well, because they saw it was a very small step from censoring pornography to censoring all sorts of other things that could potentially prevent the net from being as open and as accessible as they would want it to be. And eventually there was a big battle about this, but the Communications Decency Act ended up getting passed, but it was declared unconstitutional the very next year. And so that really kind of sunk that ship. But yeah, even in the days before the internet itself was very widely available, we had a lot of public interest and public involvement around it. So this is the last slide that I was actually able to create. So I'll unplug that for here. But and there's a few more things that happened during the NII that I could get into. But now that we've had this history lesson, I think now we can start to ask ourselves, what does this mean? What lessons can we draw from everything I've just gone over? I think one key issue that we can see is that the internet has thrived on open collaboration. That's the way it's been pretty much ever since its beginning. I know that's an attitude and belief that's very prevalent in these communities, in the Internet Society community, but now we can really see why. We can understand the context and history that made it that way. And we can also see how certain regulations and potential policies that might curtail that ability could be seen as very damaging and for the internet community. And so the issue is that we still have a very small group of stakeholders involved in these discussions. As David said before, many people aren't even aware of the idea of internet governance. Until a few years ago, I wasn't either. So what kind of options do we have to really engage people beyond a surface level? People might know what net neutrality is. People are talking about the FCC rulings. So on a certain surface level, they might understand. But on any other deeper level, we're really sort of talking to a brick wall in a certain respect. But what if we could really talk about these internet issues right where people are interfacing with them? Areas like their mobile device, areas like the things that they do and the games that they play. What if we could really bring issues of internet governance right into their faces? And that's actually something that we've been working on. We've been working on this new tool, this new game, that could really help to incite people to get involved around these issues, because they will begin to read the news, understand what's going on in terms of these internet news issues, and start to connect those to things that they can actually do. Oftentimes, the question is, even if you're aware of net neutrality or the FCC rulings, the question becomes next, what can you do? You could, write something in the FCC's comments, and you could donate to one of the organizations. But in terms of becoming an expert on these, we really isn't a clear path, and that's what we're working to develop here. You could take this online class, for example, that the Internet Society is developing, perhaps become much more knowledgeable on internet governance issues as they've existed. You can attend a meeting of the Internet Society of your local chapter and start to meet people there. And this app, this game, this system will start to bring all of these different options together. Rather than learning about an issue in one place, going to another place to find out how to do it, and then eventually working your way up into involvement, you can do it all the way right through this app. You can read it here, click it there, and even get points for what you're doing, so you can track your progress as an activist and community member in this area. So we'll have more details on that going forward, but I would imagine that the founding fathers of the Internet and the Network Working Group would be very happy with this idea. So I'm going to sign off here. Thank you for your time.
Thanks. Did you want to do Dave?
Okay. Dave might be ready.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just try and plug you into everything, okay? Just hold on a second there. This would be the...
Okay.
I'm here,
Yeah.
and I seem to be coming through pretty well.
Well, if I stick my mic here for the web stream right by you, and
Can you maximize it?
be this one,
Yeah.
okay?
Bigger than life.
Really solid frame rate, too.
Yeah.
But the problem is you stepped away, Dave. We don't see that. Oh, yes, there you are.
Okay.
Okay. I've turned off the air conditioner to have better sound. What am I supposed to be doing when?
Okay.
Well, David, his problem is that he won't be able to hear you, so what I'm going to do is
Yeah.
move this all over here so that so that you can talk to him.
Okay, so Dave, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I have it turned down low so there's not too much feedback. My headset wasn't working right, so I'm on the computer.
Okay, I'm now facing
phone.
right. I'm facing the big monitor here. Can you, as I do that, can you hear me pretty well, Dave?
Yeah. What I'm seeing now is a freeze frame of Jolie and myself is what's on my Skype screen.
Okay. We're doing pretty well on our end. You're looking great.
Okay. I can work audio even if I'm not seeing people, as long as I know what's up.
Okay. All right, I'm going to turn around this way so that that way I'm facing, and we're both facing the camera now. Okay, so how am I doing? You're hearing me okay?
Good, I'm just going to adjust the exposure a little bit here.
Okay.
Open things up a little bit. Okay. Got it.
Okay. All right, so we're next going to talk to one of our more active and highly opinionated members of the New York Internet Society, Dave Burstein. And Dave has a lot of questions and opinions about Internet governance in general, and specifically the way that the Internet Governance Forum has been organized, and the range of opinions and viewpoints and policy positions that have been presented there. He feels that they should be more diverse. And I'm going to pick it up. Well, first, Dave, why don't you give us a little bit of background on who you are and what you've been doing, and then we'll take it from there.
Hi, I'm Dave Burstein. I write about the internet at DSL Prime and Fastnet News. I do some work for the Marconi Society. I've got a webinar going there tomorrow, etc., etc. I suggested people explain their conflict of interest very clearly, so I should be upfront about mine. I earn my living on technical publications and working with the companies there. I write white papers, run webinars, and so on. I've got no financial ties to anybody who's active in policy. I give a damn about what's going on. I spent a lot of time, including 2 weeks in Dubai at the Wicket, when a lot of this came up. I'm on the State Department ITAC, and I know far too many people in Washington.
Tell us what the
Is that good?
Tell us what the ITAC is. What is that acronym? ITAC.
It's, I believe, the International Telecommunications Advisory Committee. It works with the folks at State who work on international telecommunications, ITU, Internet. Danny Sepulveda is the head. He was the opening keynote speaker this morning. He's a powerful government person. Supposedly it's an open group and a lot is discussed. That hasn't quite lived up to it lately, but that's another discussion.
Okay. All right, so let's jump to the big picture here. What do you see as the critical issues of Internet governance right now, and where do you see that going? And also, how do you see, we've just been discussing this before, but what ways do you think would facilitate more people getting involved with understanding the issues of Internet governance and getting involved with it?
Okay, that's a couple of questions.
It is,
Let me take them separately.
Sure, go ahead.
The first one is, what do I think is important in Internet governance? Frankly, I think all the stuff that we were talking about at this conference, about ICANN and names and so on, is almost meaningless. It's mostly a battle of who gets to keep the $12 you pay to register a name. If anybody started fooling around with that, you'd very promptly see the US and Western Europe pull out of the system and do what we want. So there's no way that any of these things in the fears of people like Congressman Upton that somehow the Russians are going to censor the American internet is at all possible or going to happen. That's uninteresting to me, therefore. What is interesting to me is the 5 billion people who aren't connected to the internet. I care about that. I think almost everybody on this call does. And I know, because I know most of the people who spoke today, most of them believe in that too, but they don't bring it front and center to the governance debate. There's lots in governance that directly ties into the cost of the internet to people. There's the question of how high and unreasonable patent royalties are, driving up the cost of mobile phones around the world. That will be by far the most popular way to connect to the internet within a year or two. There is another part of the US government that is working on what they call intellectual property in secret, in a trade treaty in secret, that by the looks of what's leaking has all the problems that we, including the Internet Society, rose up to fight in SOPA and PIPA. There were big issues in governance about how the money changes hands. Traditionally, Africa collected on calls coming in. That was enough money to make a difference to countries like Cameroon and Togo, where it's a big part of the budget. At Wicked, the United States, backed by the Internet Society, took a very strong position that there is no way that they should put in sender pays and the country should be able to collect that revenue. That's right for Europe. There's no particular reason to give money to Deutsche Telekom, taking away from Google or taking away from all of us on the web. But it's perfectly sensible for the Africans to put their tax in at the connection to the internet. And it's meaningful, important, and was incredibly disrespectful to ignore that and have the US throw it out. I think net neutrality belongs here too. I know that people organizing this conference didn't want to bring it in, but there's 600,000 people who've signed on to the website of the FCC crashing it to make components. The United States, and I say this from the ITAC, it isn't in the press, but I have it directly, opposed including net neutrality in WSIS. It was actually in the documents coming to us, and the United States, egged on by a couple of companies that you could predict, took a major position saying, get it out. And the folks at ITU have decided they don't want to get into a fight with the US, so it went right out. Those are, to me, the internet governance issues of importance.
Great. Okay.
Give me a next question.
Oh, okay. I'm going to pick up on the net neutrality issue. Another friend of the Internet Society, Bruce Kushnick, whose organization New Networks has done a lot of legal research about issues pertaining to net neutrality, believes that the actual physical infrastructure in the United States that's owned and operated by the incumbents is actually, the physical infrastructure is actually, should be legally under Title II already as a public utility. Are you familiar with his viewpoint on that?
This is a big debate.
Yeah.
It's an important debate for the United States, and I believe that the U.S. Internet Governance Forum should have concentrated on what we're doing wrong in the United States and how we can improve governance here. Mm-hmm. And strong neutrality enforced is definitely something that I and 600,000 other people think it should be. Mm-hmm. Isn't much of the debate today. It was almost ironic that Verizon, who was the one who beat back net neutrality in court, moderated the session that they had at the IGF and made sure that nothing was said that was substantive about the American issues. Mm-hmm. That was ugly.
Dave, if I could just, ask a bit more about, the business of the wicked and sender pays versus net neutrality. I mean, aren't they two sides of the coin? I mean, and it was, the only person who seems to be consistent in this is like McDowell, the FCC commissioner who originally, raised the alarm about wicked and who is just, is just posted an op-ed in the Washington Post today, extending the same principle, to to net neutrality. I mean, why are we for it at home but against it, elsewhere?
That's why I made a point of saying it doesn't make sense. Neutrality makes sense, and sender pay does not make sense in the United States, Germany, or advanced developing nations. It's not a particularly good way to do things in the poorer nations, but that should be their decision, especially because the amount of money that we've pulled out of the communication system, a change in the terms of trade, is hundreds of millions of dollars. It's significant to those countries. Now, I don't think any of them are going to put a big fee on there or a big tax, but while neutrality is important, the African countries having enough money to do what they need to do and for basics is not unreasonable. I don't think we should have imposed that there.
But
in addition to which, let me just finish very quick. In addition to which, there's no reason that sender pays couldn't be totally neutral and simply be based on bits. There's nothing about giving preference to Netflix involved in that. You put it at the exchange point coming into the country, and either everything pays something because the country thinks it's necessary to get that revenue, or nobody does. But you don't collect from Netflix to go through faster than I could go through on the ISOC stream.
Well, that's what we want to hear.
It's a bad compromise for the Africans to collect sender pays, but the reasons they want it, they're not unreasonable reasons, and we should at least show them some respect. We certainly should not try to eliminate the possibility of how the Africans choose to have a tax in Africa.
I mean, I think it's, the principle of the Internet Society is open internet working, which, and the end-to-end principle, which means that everything should just reach, wherever it's going, subject to best efforts. And, if the people need help, shouldn't there be some global equivalent of the Universal Service Fund rather than messing with the basic principles of how the internet works?
I don't think it's messing with the basic principles. If the transit going into Ghana happens to include a charge, because it can be absolutely and totally neutral. I think it's a terrible way to collect that charge, but I also know that there's often no decent way to collect in many countries where the phone company and its internet connection is one of the very few systems that work well enough. In addition to which, if we want to have our internet going to them without charge, we should do something to make up for the revenue that the poor countries have lost because of the changes in the phone rules, which have always been part of ITU and communications. When I look at this, I see money being lost by poor countries, it going directly to the folks doing long distance, including companies like AT&T, which may or may not be passed on to their consumers. But there's a flow of funds that is much less going to the poor countries than a few years ago. And if they think it's right to back something up, I think they should be able to make that decision. Whereas in the United States, where it has nothing to do with the basics of the finances of the government and of communications, it makes no sense to put in sender pays. But it's certainly really, and I really think it's ugly when the United States starts telling all the nations of the world, do it our way. Especially when doing it our way, as in this case, happens to be a windfall for AT&T and Verizon and the long-distance carriers, which may or may not wind up going back to consumers. Remember that AT&T and Verizon, and now Google, are by far the most powerful actors in Washington telecom policy. I should add to that the film companies, but they're desperately trying to keep their stuff out of this debate. So somehow we wind up with what the economists would call a mercantilist system. We're fighting at ITU and in all of this for things that are good for our companies, because as many companies and many countries do. But frankly, I don't like the idea of the United States getting money that had been going to poor countries.
I'll say that the one thing that I have seen from sort of watching the Internet Society work in Africa, and our major work is with the African Union in setting up the Access Project to set up IXPs in countries there, is that when they set up an IXP, the first thing they do is go and find Akamai and Google, who will pay to put their local server in because they want to reach those customers there, and they're aware of the cost of transit. So there's it is happening that these big companies are subsidizing the internet in those countries. So to quite some extent.
No, there's no reason to think that Google is subsidizing the internet in Africa or Arabia or Latin America. In fact, Google is one of the most notorious tax dodgers in the world, as is Apple.
I will say that
when
these people are setting up IXPs, that's their vital thing. Can we get, once they've got the, if you want to set up an IXP in an obscure place in Africa, what you need is those companies to come in, because they're, basically once they're in there, your rent and your interconnect is basically covered, and then you can work from there, building local content, building local connections, and that's practically the way that it is happening. That's I've watched these conferences and they talk about it. What we need is for the more of this.
Actually, we don't need more of this. All we need is already happening without any nudge from the Internet Society or the Internet governance community. The countries are realizing that IXPs are good. They're getting put in places like Gambia, small countries, small markets that are already doing that without our needing to jump in and get involved. So IXPs are fine.
I'm sure that
go ahead.
That Jane Coffin of the Internet Society will have an answer to that later. So we'll move on, David, to the next question.
Okay. To jump one step back on the...
May I ask a question of the people there?
Sure. Okay.
Okay. It's a two-part question.
Okay.
What does multi-stakeholder mean that we want to support it? And are the multi-stakeholder organizations that we see actually anything like what we want multi-stakeholder to be? And I ask that very pointedly because 4 out of the 5 keynotes at this multi-stakeholder Internet governance conference were from United States government officials, as were the 2 luncheon speakers. That sure doesn't sound like anything but U.S. dominated and U.S. corporate dominated to me. And if so, I think multi-stakeholder should have another name.
This is the IGF USA, right?
Yes. I mean, what Jeremy just said, this is the IGF USA, is it? Right. And yes, it is. And in terms
And what you learn in Washington is they're very skilled operators who treat this internet governance debate, or the neutrality debate, or the regulation debate, the same way Americans treat political campaigns. Barack Obama could not have been elected if he hadn't raised $1 billion. He has brilliant folks trying to find a way to frame the discussion that gets things going his way. In that case, in votes. In this case, in a system where the United States says it's multi-stakeholder, but as a practical matter, we really keep control. And people like David Gross, before Wicked, were out there with nearly unlimited money. I have a friend who was an economist, and he said, yeah, Gross had spoken to him. Gross is the former U.S. ambassador on this, who's now a lawyer-lobbyist at Wiley Ryan. He's a really nice guy. He's a sweet guy. He wants to do things right, but he represents his clients. And his clients wanted to have a certain kind of control of the internet. Google and Microsoft want it going their way. That's what corporations do. And they have spent so much money on so many different things that it's poisoned the debate.
Right. Okay,
I don't think many people realize that the multi-stakeholder we're talking about is not even close to represent the people we think should be the stakeholders.
Okay, right. So my question there is, do you think that there is a benefit to making this seem less dry and arid, and basically educating people and making them feel more that they can and that it's of interest, in their interest, to get involved with internet governance?
I personally think that anything that manages to leave out the majority of people on the internet in the world for practical purposes, and except for a few carefully chosen tokens, don't even bring them in to our own multi-stakeholder debate. I mean, you look at the folks. There was one person on the neutrality panel who probably supports it in the United States, but he was carefully chosen. I looked at the board of his organization, and he has Comcast and Verizon on the board of his organization. That doesn't mean he's evil. It means, however, that the voices that wouldn't get money from Comcast and Verizon didn't show up. I see dozens of people being paid to go to Turkey in 2 months, who are well-meaning people, who have every reason to be in the debate, but they're all on one side of the discussion. And that's just, I don't think it's sustainable in the long run. It's about as far as you can get from the ideas of democracy and representation as the U.S. could possibly get away with.
Well, I think I'd like to clarify what David was asking a little bit.
Yeah.
There's two aspects to what you're saying here, David. One is that, people need to create more of an opportunity. These organizations and stakeholder groups need to create more of an opportunity for additional voices. But on the other end, these additional voices also need to be incentivized to try and participate. So there's really 2 points of connection here. And what you're talking about really is sort of the first one. How are these institutions making room or not making room for these voices? But what about the other end? Getting people to incentivize to be part of the conversation in the first place.
And that's why I'm here talking today. That's why I did a big push to open up the ITAC and put out to people the information on how you could get on it. Jonathan, who we know, joined at that point. So did David Reed, for example. And I absolutely believe that we need to turn this around and get it closer to representing consumer interest.
Okay, so we'll tell you, let me just quickly mention a project that Jeremy and I are now working on and see how that sounds to you. We're working with another person, Josephine Dorado, to develop a online and mobile game for internet governance, where you could win prizes and points for learning about how it works and then getting directly involved with the process of internet governance, making it fun and gamifying it. Does that sound like a good idea to you?
I'm in favor of everything that gets the facts out, gets people involved, and is pro-consumer in the long run.
Well, that would certainly be our goal. Okay, I'd like to thank you very much for taking your time and providing an alternate, viewpoint here. I think it's been very valuable. And thanks again. And we'll be consulting you further on policy issues and possibly the game development. Next, maybe we can bring on Richard Kipple and have another one of our board members.
Sure.
And
Okay, goodbye, folks.
take it easy.
Bye.
Thanks again.
Okay, are you gonna,
Whatever, wherever you want me to sit.
well, you sit here.
I expect to.
Yeah, this is our hot seat.
Yeah. I don't have a presentation or. anything.
Don't worry about
I
it.
just,
Okay,
yeah.
we're just gonna. I'll ask you a few questions.
Something like Mike or shorter.
Yeah, that's. Yeah, okay, we're gonna be a lot shorter here. Then. Okay, so we're next going to Richard Kipple, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the other activities that you're involved in and initiatives that you're involved with.
Hi, I'm Richard Nipel. I'm a member of the board of ISOC-New York. I'm also president currently of Wikimedia New York City.
Hold on a sec.
Sorry.
Just adjusting exposure again.
It's different angles.
Okay, now you're good.
Hi, I'm Richard Nipel. I'm a member of the board of ISOC New York, also currently president of Wikimedia New York City, which is the local group supporting Wikipedia outreach in the New York City area. Been active in free culture and intellectual property activism for a number of years now. And I'm interested in having a more free and open participatory internet. And I'm not, I don't consider myself an expert on internet governance, but to the extent that we can make it a more open system where people can join and new ventures can succeed, including nonprofit ventures and volunteer-driven ventures, I'm very much in favor of that.
Okay, to pick up that thread, what do you see as obstacles for that or threatening the current situation in terms of the open availability of information and access particularly to the many people who are either underserved in terms of internet access or do not currently have it?
Yeah, so something, sorry.
A big question.
Yeah.
It's open-ended. You can pick up on any part of it that you want to
Yeah.
answer first.
So an issue like net neutrality is a pretty serious issue for a project like Wikipedia, like other the free knowledge projects around the world. These projects would not be possible if it weren't for the existing status of net neutrality that's more or less existed for a number of years. Wikipedia did not start off because someone got a lot of venture capital and they started a project. It was basically an accident where someone who had a small company, side project of that company, became a massive volunteer-driven encyclopedia, and it was able to grow because the data was treated equally between the Verizon project and the Comcast project and this volunteer nonprofit project. It's obviously very important that that internet growth and accessibility is around the world. There are a lot of projects, like I'm speaking too much probably about Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is much more valuable on a per person basis in the developing world than it is in the U.S. In the U.S., it's kind of nice, it's useful sometimes. In a lot of countries of the world, there has never been an encyclopedia in that language before, ever, and it's very valuable that we can spread that knowledge and that people can help improve the knowledge available in their language. And it's obviously, and also, from a general stance of intellectual property, it's very valuable to have systems where people can share their knowledge. And also, it would be really great if there was some intellectual property reform, considering the copyright laws, considering even the older works. There's a lot of knowledge locked up in books that were written between 1923 and 1964 that is currently inaccessible. Basically, 90% of these books have not had their copyright renewed. They're in the public domain. They should be usable by everyone. They are not, because it's very hard to find this information. If there was a small reform of the Copyright Act, we could have that knowledge be widely accessible and be used in open platforms, and without any significant commercial risk to any actual company.
That's great. Okay, and in terms of disseminating just take a step back here in terms of a project like the Wikipedia. What do you think would further facilitate Wikimedia in terms of using the internet to better disseminate, that body of knowledge?
Projects that have been made to make, to make increased access to nonprofit information-driven resources have been pursued in the past, and I think there's a lot of opportunity in that. There have been a lot of projects to promote translations, to promote languages, other than English and the major European languages.
Would you say that the physical infrastructure development and affordability issues are also?
Yes, there's been a lot of. There's been a lot of thought to give into how information delivering sites can make use of, say, SMS and other lower bandwidth, ways to deliver basic information, including things like health information.
Okay, picking up on that thread just a little bit more. My question is, again, to use the example of, say, developing countries and that type of thing, are there any kinds of policy issues that you can think of that would assist in terms of getting more people access to the internet so they can use the Wikipedia? That's, I guess, the question.
Obviously, net neutrality in general, particularly with the growth of more high bandwidth things that are coming down the line. A lot of free knowledge in the future is going to be communicated by video, and that hasn't been the case in the past.
Right. Wikipedia is now just beginning to integrate the video more heavily into Wikipedia. I know. So, right. Okay. Anything else you want to add on top of that?
No, I'd like to be part of the conversation.
Right. Okay. So we like having you here.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. Okay, I guess we're going to kind of pause now. Jolly, I'm going to throw this over to you. And there's going to be a point where we do a final.
What's been going on the IGF page site so far?
I'm not quite sure.
You going to speak?
Oh, Jared, would you like to make a quick?
No, I'm good. Yeah, I think maybe just that ThoughtWorks is here to support the community in these conversations, and that we will continue to do so.
Okay, well, we can.
Can we sit down here and just talk for a minute?
Yeah,
so
right.
On the mic.
Sure.
Right. Okay. So let me thank you, and then you can give just a quick plug for ThoughtWorks.
Sure. Yeah. Very simple.
Right.
Very quick.
And what's your official title here again?
My official title at ThoughtWorks is the connector.
Oh, I see. Okay.
My rule. The thing about ThoughtWorks is that, and for those of you in DC that don't know too much about the
Actually,
organization,
are we rolling now or not? Yes. Are we're going right now?
Sorry, I'm running 30 seconds behind.
Right. Okay. Good. Are we rolling now, or should we start?
We're still rolling.
Okay.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Great.
All right.
So ThoughtWorks is a global software tech consultancy with 3,000 employees in 29 offices in 12 countries all around the world. So we truly take a global stance on our view, our views, especially in this matter. But we're filled with a ton of really amazing people, and we have kind of we have positions available constantly just for smart people in the world that want to make a difference. And so I think that we're the first software consultancy to have an on-staff practicing medical doctor. We're the first software consultancy to have a director of the global internet, a director of the new economy. All of these people at ThoughtWorks that do really amazing things within the industry, focused on topics that we care about and that are really important to the way that we do business. So I am one of those people. Our third pillar, our social justice pillar, kind of employees here at ThoughtWorks. My role is sort of experimental. Started here in the New York office, and we're now expanding roles like mine all around the world, starting with Johannesburg and San Francisco next. But my role here, my title is the connector, and my responsibility is to find and connect with organizations and kind of communities in Silicon Alley, and bring them closer to ThoughtWorks. First, to connect with them digitally, and then bring them into our space so that they get more familiar with kind of our vibe in our office and how we deal with these problems. And then after that, I find individuals within those external organizations and connect them with individuals within ThoughtWorks that have a complementary skill set or similar interests.
That's great.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
The first one is you're an agile house, ThoughtWorks.
Yes, yeah. Two of the founding fathers of the agile methodology are still with us. Jim Highsmith, who's constantly on clients, and Martin Fowler, our chief scientist, who is based just outside of Boston.
So one wonders if some of the agile methodology couldn't be brought to internet governance, where when there are certain tasks and things to be thought out, and I'm thinking, they have the dynamic coalitions at the Internet Governance Forum, which take specific, things and try and work through them and figure them out.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, there's one on core internet values that's run by our Chennai chapter, and if someone who's an expert facilitator who knows, the Scrum Master or something, we couldn't, apply some of that expertise into the governance process.
How does that sound to you? I
mean, it sounds totally doable. I think that there are a lot of people at ThoughtWorks that the issue of internet governance really kind of like hits home with, and I'm sure that especially in Chennai, where we have like a huge community, it's. I think that it's doable. Yes. Sorry, I may have gotten lost in the question.
No, okay, that's okay.
That's a good lead. No, it's a good lead.
That's a good lead. No, okay. So yes, we would like to.
And my second is more general. Is that one of the things that us for the Internet Society and for internet governance in general is that Silicon Alley, the whole young startup, thing. They don't really participate in internet governance. And in fact, it's amazing how many of them, when we say, "Oh, we work for the Internet Society," they say, "What's that?" They've no awareness, of the basic how the internet works. It's just something they use. How do we get breakthrough?
I don't know. I think that
any input that way we're receptive to. Any ideas you have, we're receptive to.
I think. I totally see where you're coming from, and I can see kind of the same monster growing on the West Coast in San Francisco.
Why did so many people, because they just said they were going to break the internet, or because it was cool, because Reddit went for it?
I really think it's just this like young mindset of not really knowing where the internet came from, and how the internet's grown. I think that's why people don't really understand or care to know more about these issues. I think that it's ignorance in part.
We need more evangelists. We only have Vint really.
Yeah.
Right. Do you think developing new educational tools and gamifying them could have potential in terms of getting the word out more?
Yes, I think that the startup community and kind of like all of these kind of personalities in the communities that we deal with here are probably they're very social people. They're doers, they're makers, and I think that the way to really get them is probably not as much to gamify kind of the content, but to kind of like infiltrate in those meetings, those meetups, those social happenings, and to really have an expert from this world go to that sphere and say, these are the potential problems that you could face with this product or with this launch or with this partnership. I think that's probably a great way to go about introducing these people, or just adding a voice from this community to their conversation,
Right.
which I think is where the magic would happen.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, we're going to work on that more.
Cool.
And you'll help us.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so thanks for being at ThoughtWorks.
Thanks for having us here, too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so finally, David,
Finally.
if you want to, do a 2-minute
Yes.
summary, which they may or may not show
Yes.
at plenary.
Uh-huh. And
you know,
what's the time? That will be live, and what's the time?
That's the last thing you can do here, and I can carve it out. So,
What you said about
pull the mic a little bit in closer to you.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
And it's just so.
So you're going to record this and then...
This is going, and I'll just clip it. So.
Okay, okay. Okay, I'm David Salmanoff, president of the New York chapter of the Internet Society. We're here at ThoughtWorks with the satellite hub for the Internet Governance Forum USA. And we've just had a conversation with a number of our most opinionated and active members who've expressed their concern about a broader definition of multi-stakeholder that truly encompasses all people who use the Internet. There was some concern about the still remaining, what they felt was still a remaining U.S. and Western Europe-centric viewpoint in terms of Internet governance issues. A great concern on everyone's part about net neutrality, although perhaps this different types of ideas in terms of solutions, whether regulatory or opening up the playing field to more competitive services. I think many of our members would like to see both things happen. And most importantly, to keep the Internet open and free, and to address issues that have to do with more overly onerous intellectual property laws and restrictions that really prevent the free flow of information. We had a good talk here with Richard Kipple of the Wikimedia Foundation discussing the tremendous value that that particular project, open source project, has, particularly to poor people and people in developing countries, and the importance of an open internet and network neutrality and making that type of resource available and vibrant and continuing to evolve and producing that type of social benefit. It's a great example of what can be done on the internet that wasn't possible before. So again, I'd like to thank everybody, and we're working on one of the other issues that we were discussing at great length was the need for a greater educational outreach and bringing more people into the process of internet governance, educating them and making it easy and accessible and even fun to get involved with this, where currently many people just take the internet for granted when it works and are angry when it doesn't, but don't quite know what to do about it. So we want to go to the next level here, and I'd like to thank ThoughtWorks for making the space available and to providing a lot of positive input to our project today. Thank you.
Okay. And that's it, I guess.
Okay. All right. I didn't cover every one of Dave Burstein's criticisms, but
It didn't stop yet. Okay. Hang on.
Okay.
Does live stream work through like a special box? Is it just covering?
It doesn't need that, but having a coprocessor for that is very helpful.
Broadcast.
Okay. Okay. So where are we now?
Still in ThoughtWorks, last I checked.
Well, we're still live, you're saying?
I said we're still in ThoughtWorks, last I checked.
Right.
That's good.
Right.
That's concerned. We're done, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, we really didn't get to see the IGF USA much of that.
No, we didn't, because we were